Okay, a lot of I call them big changes, but we got a lot of changes here today. I've departed from the simple setup, which wasn't actually simple. But I really finally got motivated to finish what I envisioned. When I moved to where I am currently, I knew I wouldn't be able to make noise like I used to. What I used to be able to simply get done with a Shure MV88, which was a stereo mic that just connects directly to your iPhone. I'm not going to be able. I wasn't going to be able to do here in the new home. So a lot of things happened. The modeling slash capturing, the SSL6. I also had a Mackie mixer there for a while, and a couple of just very entry level interfaces. And then of course we've got the Neve 88M. Now that's obviously an indulgence in my setting. Now remember, I'm not tracking, so the setup's different in the respect that it's kind of a live recording rig rather than a rig that I'm tracking into a DAW. So I have to think a little differently when I'm doing this stuff. And I've tried a bunch of different stuff, and all those videos are on the channel here. I do this all improvised and impromptu. So if this is the kind of thing that genuinely interests you, there's no lack of information on here. I try and title my videos based on what I'm working on at the moment. But what we've got today is, the struggle for me is, I'm sorry, I love the amp action. I've got the vintage JC120, if something from the 80s could be considered vintage. The Bassbreaker 45 is kind of a new addition, and that's one of the amps I'm using today. I've got the Morgan PR5, which the Nano Cortex, I have a capture of my Morgan PR5 on there, and that's one of the amps I'm using today. And then I've got a few other amps. Yes, I prefer a mic'd amp. I don't prefer a close mic live amp, though. I always preferred amp where I'm mic'd, I don't know, anywhere from 1 to 2 feet off of the cone on a stereo mic. Again, that would be live. In a studio setting, what I did for many years is record a direct out along with an open mic, and then use a combination of the open mic and the direct recording to create my tracked sound. Now, what we've got today is maybe my current iteration of that. So what we're doing here is we're taking the Nano Cortex, and I've captured my Morgan PR5 on there. This is and you'll find it on there if you look up At Home on 2 on the Nano Cortex captures, you'll find it. There's 2 PR5s. I can't remember what I called this one. I think this one's called the PR5 Clean, and the other one's just called the Morgan PR5. Both captures I like, but this particular one I'm using today is the PR5 Clean, as well as my Bassbreaker 45 through the Torpedo Captor 8 8 ohm. I am sending power to it through the brown box at, what do we got here, 118 volts. Okay, now I'm sending both of those things. So this is the main reason for this video today. This is the first Vertex pedal I've ever owned. It is called the Nyle, and it's purple. And I can tell you exactly why it probably failed, because it's ugly and it has a terrible name. However, the compression side on this is an 1176 emulation, and the boost or slash preamp side of this is a 1073, a Neve 1073. So I'm real curious. I literally have not listened to this thing yet, so we're going to experiment with that today. Going into the OB1, which I've decided is my favorite pedal board style optical compressor, into the Analog Man Sunface. And yes, I would prefer to have my fuzz in front of the compression. However, the compression just raises the noise floor too much. Not interested. And I'm just fine trying to figure that out post compression because that noise floor is gone. Today, I'm like in the Brothers AM because I have the Trio Plus. I have to think along the lines of EQing my guitar as an in the mix kind of EQ rather than doing my full ambient. Hang on. Sorry, a lot of ambient noise there. Prior to getting this thing back, by the way, I used to have the old Trio. I was just doing the ambient spacey thing, and you could use full range there because you really got nobody to step on but yourself in the mix. So the reason I think the Brothers fits real well is the Brothers is voiced for a mix. So when the Trio kicks in and that's got the bass and the drums, the Brothers almost over exaggerates the guitar EQ in the mix. Okay. So I'm going from the Brothers AM. So again, just to recap, Nyle, OB1, fuzz, gain, and then down to the floor, which is my little alligator, back up into the JHS buffered splitter. Okay. Now the buffered splitter, this is where things get very different. I'm going into the Nano Cortex and I'm running a capture of my Morgan PR5 with no IR loaded. No effects, no IR, nothing. It's just my Morgan PR5 clean capture, okay? The other side is going out to the Bass Breaker 45, out of the speaker output of the Bass Breaker 45 into the torpedo captor, and out of the torpedo captor and the Nano Cortex into the first two channels of my SSL6, okay? So what I'm finding, at least today, I'm using the compression on both channels and the preamps on both channels. And I'm sending through the Q-Sends, mono, by the way, just the left side, out into the Trio Plus. And then out of the Trio Plus, what do they call it? The mixer output is going to be just into channel 4 on the SSL6, which is the bass and the drums. And then the output of the, what do they call the output on that one? The amp output is going mono into the HX effects, okay? The effects send and return are stereo, and those are going into the Zoya, which has my sound on sound loop. I call it Atmospheres 2. I have not loaded up the patch storage yet, so don't go looking for it. Into the Volante, into the Night Sky, back in through the effects loop on the HX effects. Mind you, again, there's no IRs loaded yet. The bubble echo, just because I think that adds a weird, kooky kind of background, bubbles blobbing around every once in a while. Into the shuffling looper, which I've become a big fan of. This screen on my particular HX effects doesn't work. However, I can load effects into it. It works normal. The screen doesn't work right. I got this HX effects for like $275, so I figure it's worth sacrificing viewing it. If I need to load another effect into a foot switch, I can just adjust it the way I want and then put it into that area. So because I can't see it in that area. And then in a parallel path, I have on one part of the path, I have a stereo 3 oscillator synth, and then the Asheville pattern And then those come back together into the retro reel. And then one of the amazing things about the Line 6 HX effects is you can load stuff into the signal chain, but it doesn't have to be assigned to a pedal. So the very last thing in the signal chain is the IRs. Now, the reason why the HX effects, and I would imagine the other Line 6 products, the reason why the IR loader in these is really, really fantastic is you can load it in stereo, and you can also do what I love about the JC120. And the thing I like about the JC120 is there's some sort of out of phase thing going on when you engage the chorus or the vibrato. And you can do that with the HX Effects IR loader. So I have a stereo IR loader. One side is out of phase with the other, which gives it that interesting kind of out of, 3D-ness or whatever you want to call it. But I don't have to be married to the JC120 amp sound. So again, I've got the bass breaker 45 combined with the capture of the Morgan PR5 going through, obviously, the wet effects. The wet effects are only going through the stereo channel 3 on the SSL6. And I want to talk a moment about this, but once that goes out, back through the 6, it's going through the 88M into my OBS software, which I have. Well, what do I have here? I have the Convology XT Convolution Reverb, and then I've got the Drummer S73 plugin. These are all plugins. I've got X Limit at the end just to keep it under control, and then I have the what's this meter called? The Uline loudness meter, just so I know where I'm at by the time it hits the hard drive. So I'm not tracking, so I haven't been treating this as a studio setup. I've been treating this as a live setup, but something that I think has been lost in my recordings that I used to do when I used to track all the time is having a dry, unmolested copy of my signal in the recording path. Now, I'm still not tracking, however, because I'm coming in channels 1 and 2 with the Nano Cortex and the Bass Breaker 45 before I'm going out of the Q sends, is I now have a dry core tone that I can send to the interface as well as the wet. What that does is it adds a very clean parallel signal, I guess, again, unmolested, into signal. I'm not necessarily married to my wet effects. I can mix in more of the dry tone if I need to of either amp, because again, I'm blending both of these amps. Now, right now, just in a generic way, I'm blending the direct core tone in at negative 20 dB, and then I'm still letting the wet effects kind of be the primary source of tone for the whole setup. But that's a basic overview of the setup right now. And I'm holding my camera because this freaking camera stand and the iPhone don't cooperate with each other. However, this is very different. I don't think I've seen a single video on YouTube where anybody's combining a capture or a model along with an actual amp through a reactive load box. And I think I've got really great results. I might need to re-EQ it a little bit, but again, that's always a process depending on what you're working on. So that's a snapshot of what's going on now. But today, to circle all the way back to my original comment, the purple and pink terribly named Nyle, which might be really cool. I honestly have not played this yet, but when I saw, so I like stacking compression. I really like the 1176 into the LA2A style compression. Generally, when I'm adding gain in, it's not so much that I want more gain, it's that I want more sustain. So stacking compression like this, especially an 1176 style into an LA2A, usually gives me the kind of clean. Do I have any tone here? There we go. Usually gives me that clean. Let's turn off all these effects here real quick. Only thing I'm leaving on is the retro reel. So really, I'm looking for that snappiness on the 1176 into the LA2A style, or in this case, the Strymon OB1, the optical style. Now, I don't have anything on right now other than the retro reel. So you're hearing the blend of both amps, the capture my PR5 blended with the bass breaker 45. Back in through the stereo input on SSL6. I do have the G-Series bus compression on before it hits the 88M, and then I've already explained what plugins I got running, which isn't much. So let's mess with the Nyle. I believe, I have no idea, I'm going to have to see if they still have the manual online for this. So as far as I know, the Nyle's discontinued. But if you look at what people pay for 1073 preamps, Neve 1073 preamps, and 1176 style compressors, and the price I paid for this thing might be a real hidden gem. It might be a good secret weapon. So even though it's fucking ugly and dumb named, I can guarantee you it may not be the only reason this particular pedal got discontinued, but man, it was a contributor. So I'm going to mute my mic, and we're just going to mess with this thing and put a sound together and see if we can do a little recording. So there we go. I can't even read what this pedal says. What the hell does this thing say? Okay, so the right side, this little switch says attack. And then I honestly can't read the other one. I think it says treble, but I don't know. We'll find out. All right, I'm going to keep that as my basic setting, which is pretty much everything right down the middle. I'm going to add in the OB1 now, and then start adding in the effects and try a little recording here. Let's see what happens. Well, so far adds a nice amount of clarity, which is what I usually go for with an 1176. Um, I actually worked in a studio for a number of years. I don't recall ever using a 1073. I probably did. So I don't exactly know what it's supposed to be doing for me, but it does something. Actually, the great test on this is if I turn it on and everything's at noon, I think that's a great thing. If I don't have to do any sort of, wrenching to get this thing to sound the way I want, I'm obviously going to have to backtrack and listen up or read up on what this thing is supposed to do. But it does add something nice. Add in the Brothers AM. More gain on the Brothers AM both sides. It seems nice. So let's add in some more effects here and see what we got. So again, I think the big change here isn't so much the Nile here, which in a general way, I've got everything at noon and neutral, and it sounds exactly good. So that's a great sign. All right, let's add in the stereo field. So having the capture mixed in with the live amp through the reactive load box, slightly mixed in with the wet effects, is the entire difference in the way the recording sounds. Now, it's interesting, there might be just a little latency that's creating some sort of faux or real modulation, but it's as three-dimensional as you can possibly ask for. And as usual, I'm just improvising, so I don't even have a progression set up in the trio. So I'm going to make something up here real quick. We'll see if it works out, but I'm going to mute the mic here and see what we get. All right, so obviously I'm going to have to dig in, but as first impressions go, and by the way, this is the first Vertex pedal I've ever owned. And I should also do a quick shout out to the JHS buffered splitter. I don't really, I've never owned anything else from either of these brands, but in the case of the splitter, it served its need perfectly many times. I just haven't found a need to buy any other effects from JHS, but kind of the same story with the Vertex stuff. Obviously, they have a very specific crowd, I guess. I don't would I call them more indie specific. There's a certain player that uses the Vertex stuff. Maybe I'm wrong in that. Maybe this is me discovering a brand that I like a lot more than I thought I would. But when I saw that this is a 1073 married to an 1176, it's like, holy crap, how the hell did I ever miss this? Because, again, I've kind of got a closet fetish for compression and preamps for that matter. I haven't really, I kind of eliminated it from the pedal board proper only because I've got the SSL6 and the Neve 88M. I do not need preamps right now, but having a 1073 in the beginning here, I got to read the manual on this. I saw this, and the kind of price you get these for is just, if it's as good as it seems so far, and you just heard it, sounds fantastic. And I haven't even read the manual on it. I just have everything at noon and neutral, and it's just on. And it's unity gain, and it works. It's working well with my optical compressor. Again, the 1176 into an optical compressor is kind of a classic studio setup. Even though I'm not tracking, I still am using studio, I guess, techniques to achieve the sound I'm getting. And, when I first started doing these videos, it was kind of just for my friends, just to show them what I'm up to these days, because I live in a different part of the country I used to. But it was also an exercise in me learning how to record something live rather than in a studio setting. I was always a studio kind of guy. I'm not terribly interested in playing live or playing in bands or anything. But these recordings are ultimately live recordings. So I'm kind of applying what I learned over the decades in studio recording to what would be a home live recording, which is what you're hearing on all my videos. So the 1073, the preamp stuff, along with the bus compression, using a dry signal mixed in parallel, a dry core tone mixed in parallel with the wet effects, which are not 100% wet, by the way, so there's still dry signal coming through that stuff, is this kind of hybrid thing I've created for my own little home setting here, only because I literally can't record with a mic anymore. If I still had that MV88 with a wet, dry, wet setup in my amps, I probably would be just fine. If you listen to some of my early recordings, there's a certain, when you're using a very dense mix like this, i.e. a lot of effects, there's something about a slightly open mic position that captures all the depth, not just capturing all the different effects, but there's a certain depth to a lot of that, where all these things are happening not only in left to right, but they're front to back within the image. That's kind of hard to get when you're only recording direct. I got nothing against recording direct. I started recording direct almost the same time I started playing guitar, which was in 1986. And it wasn't because I thought it was a better method or anything. It's just I had no other choice. I had no good microphones, and I had a basic little Fostex 4-track. And moved on to other recording mediums as I progressed through the years. But with this setup right here, mixing in the actual amp through a reactive load box, mixed with a capture of one of my other amps, is something, first off, I've never heard before. I'm sure somebody's done it somewhere, but I've just never come across it on YouTube, which is really the only place I mess around. But I think it's really resulting in some excellent recordings. Again, I'm legitimately improvising here. You just heard me. I had no idea what I was going to play or even what key I was going to play in before I started recording. And the result there was pretty satisfying to me. Again, I'm going to have to listen back to it, but that's what I love to do now. Instead of spending 8 to 12 hours minimum getting things set up or editing in post-production or spending an extra couple hours in pre-production, I can just come in here, plug in something, in this case the Nile, and improvise something into the trio, find a beat that works for me. The thing with the trio is it's not so much the drum beats, it's the bass lines that I really try and get that I think will fit with the way I play. Again, this isn't normally the way I play. This is the way I play in this setting. Very simple, very straightforward. I let the mode determine the mood of it. And I'm very satisfied when I'm done. So I'm real curious as to how this sounds. So, oh my goodness, 37 minutes. What the hell's the matter with me? All right, so hopefully you drew something from this. I think this particular video of all the videos I've ever made is legitimately different in the fact that I'm blending a amp with a capture. There's so much out there about whether amps, tube amps for that matter, and or captures or models are worthwhile. Why not both? So that's kind of what this is an example of. So let's see how it sounds. In any case, thanks for, my God, if you lasted this long in a video, I'm doing something right. In any case, have a good one.